Today's episode is sponsored by Midwest Fire. For more than 20 years, Midwest Fire has been manufacturing high-quality tankers, tanker pumpers, and fire rescue vehicles in the United States and Canada. Keeping firefighters safe while enhancing their capabilities is what they do best. To learn more, go to MidwestFire.com.
This is Dave Dotson, creator of the Art of Reading Smoke program and co-author of the newly released Art of Reading Buildings book. And you're listening to the SA Matters radio show with Rich Gassaway. The SA Matters mission is simple. They want to help us see the bad things coming in time to avoid bad outcomes.
Hello, and welcome to episode 67 of the Situational Awareness Matters radio show. I'm your host, Rich Gassaway. The purpose of this show is to improve situational awareness and decision-making for individuals and teams who work in high-risk, high-consequence environments. The SA Matters mission is simple: to help you see the bad things coming in time to avoid bad outcomes. I'm coming to you today from the north shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota, where I have my staff on a retreat to do some strategic planning and to enjoy a little R&R time. In today's episode, I interview close call survivor Lieutenant Todd Budd. Todd Budd entered the fire service as a student at Ivy Tech College, earning an associate's degree in public safety technology. He became a member of the Wayne Township Fire Department on the west side of Indianapolis, Indiana, and he took his education and shared it there as the training lieutenant. He continued his fire service career working part-time for the White River Township Fire Department in Greenwood, Indiana, and the Wishart Ambulance Service in Indianapolis. In 1998, he was sworn in as a career firefighter with the Brownsburg Fire Territory. Throughout his career, he continued to advance his knowledge, skills, and abilities by taking additional certification coursework, gaining experience in administrative levels of the fire service through his part-time and volunteer organizations in the central Indiana area. He served as a rescue technician with Indiana Task Force 1 and was deployed to the search and rescue efforts during Hurricane Ike in 2008. Today, he's been aggressively following modern fire behavior research and tactics used around the world to solve the modern-day fire attack, as well as improving his leadership skills. This year, Todd will be celebrating his 19th year of marriage to the love of his life, and he has two children, a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. Let's jump into our interview with Lieutenant Todd Budd, sharing his close call survivor experience. Lieutenant Todd Budd, at the time of his close call event, was serving as an acting officer on Brownsburg Ladder Company 131. They were dispatched to assist the neighboring community at a working building fire. The call came in a little after midnight, and the on-duty crew of 4 responded with a battalion chief. Lieutenant Budd was the acting officer, on the quint. While responding, information was relayed to the crew from one of their off-duty firefighters who was at the scene in an unofficial capacity that the fire in the building, approximately a 100-year-old building, 50 feet wide to the rear and 80 foot up the sides, the restaurant on the main floor and apartments on the second floor, and an open cockloft. The fire was advancing, and the first due units had been there for an hour and a half prior to Brownsburg being dispatched. The crew was advised that the fire was extending into the cockloft and the roof needed to be ventilated. The quint's assignment was to lay a 5-inch supply to an engine in the rear and then go to the roof and ventilate. While they were on the roof to ventilate, Lieutenant Todd became distracted and he ended up walking right into the ventilation hole, resulting in several injuries and several important lessons learned, including considering the building type, construction, and hazards prior to engagement, the need to employ tactics that fit the situation versus employing universal tactics the way we're taught in training, the need to understand fire behavior, and the need to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? A question he references several times throughout the interview. Let's jump into our interview with Brownsburg Fire Lieutenant Todd Budd, describing his close call survival experience.
This was a call that took place, it was after 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it was around that time. It was after midnight. It was January 2001. There really wasn't a lot of snow on the ground, but for Indiana, it was about average. And, we just had a typical day. I was riding the officer's seat of the ladder truck. I wasn't fulfilling an officer's role other than riding in the seat of the ladder truck. And I had a crew of 4, myself, the driver operator, and 2 firefighters assigned to it.
Todd, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How up to this point, how often had you had the chance to ride in the right front seat? Was this a pretty regular thing, or was this kind of a new opportunity for you?
This was actually kind of a regular thing for me. The dynamics of our department at the time were we were in a pretty significant growth stage, and so we were dumping a lot of firefighters onto the department, but the promotional processes really hadn't taken place. I mean, we had formal process. We had merited firefighters or merited officers in place, but the funds at the time was being more distributed toward adding staff rather than adding rank.
Mm-hmm. Now, how long had you been in the fire service at this point?
At that time, I'd been in the fire service for about 9 years.
Okay.
I've attended. I got a degree in fire science. Of course, FDIC is right there in our back door because we're a suburb of Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And so the officer seat wasn't foreign to me at all.
Okay.
I volunteered with the volunteer fire department on the west side of Indianapolis for a number of years. Was an appointed lieutenant there. So I wasn't on my heels, so to speak.
Okay.
So at any rate, it was just a typical day. It was a typical January day. Went to bed 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And the call came out, like I said, I know it was after midnight. I think it was more around 2 o'clock. And we were called to assist a neighboring department, which is actually about 10 miles away from us, if I were to speculate. And maybe a little bit more, a little bit less of that. But at any rate, it was about that far. And it was to go and assist the department on a working building fire. It was actually dispatched to us as a working building fire. We were an extra company. We weren't on the initial response.
Okay.
And so we headed out, and we were radioed.
What's your crew size?
4. There's
Okay.
myself, the operator, and 2 firefighters.
Okay.
So we headed out. The radio system in our area at that time had not progressed to county-wide system.
Okay.
And so we had our own dispatch center. There was a county-wide dispatch center, and there was another department in the county that had their own dispatch center. We were still on the low-band radio system, the 154 megahertz, and we were told en route by one of the guys that is on our department, but he just happened to be in town and heard the fire go out, and so he went, and he had a department radio. And so he told us en route that the building had been on fire for about an hour and a half. It was a old Type 3 building, and that the fire was starting to make an extension into the cockloft. And then our assignment was going to be to ventilate the roof upon our arrival.
Okay.
This was actually conveyed to me from a different person other than the chiefs operating at the scene.
This was from your firefighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was
Now,
was he checked in with command? You know, was he part of the incident command structure there, or he was informally contacting you and giving you instructions separate from what maybe command knew about?
Command knew about it. He was there. He was not a recognized member of their command staff at that point. He was just, hey, what do you guys need? Let's call, ladder 131. I'll let them know what's going on, that typical thing.
Okay.
So, and this kind of segues into one of the first mistakes, and it's a pretty embarrassing mistake. But at the time, we had so many different dispatch centers. Our radios were pretty low grade, and we had 16 channels on these radios, and they had a laminated piece of paper that was taped to the radio to tell you what channel was who. So we had our dispatch center and our operations channel on channel 1. Channel 2 is another department. Channel 3 was another department. Channel 4 was our TAC channel, and so on and so on. Well, the mobile radio was labeled. It was in the screen of the radio. It told you what channel you were on and who was on that channel. So mitigating between our dispatch center and the operations of the fire was pretty easy because from the mobile radio, because it was all labeled. Where the problem came in play was when we actually got off the truck. I grabbed my handheld, I turned it on, and that's when I realized I didn't have a list of who was what on that handheld radio.
So
now, since then...
So you didn't know what channel to go to at that point?
No, I did not.
Okay.
And again, like I said, I mean, it's just a completely embarrassing situation. I went to this guy that was off duty, and I said, I don't know what channel they're on, so I'm just going to talk with you, because he was standing right there at the command post.
Okay.
And so I told him, I said, hey, I don't know what channel they're on. I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'm talking to you. You're right here. I'm just going to convey information between you and I, and you can relay it to him.
All right.
And they seem to be okay with that. Now, our county has progressed since then, and we've got the countywide dispatch center. We're on the 800 megahertz. We're all intercommunication capabilities, so we've really made strides in that area. But regardless, communication is one of the key factors that played a role in this.
Okay.
And so, as we go back to the responding, so he notifies us and say, we got this Type 3 building that's been on fire for an hour and a half, and we're going to need you guys to go to the roof and open it up because it's making its way in its cockloft. And at this point, I didn't really have any issues. The hour and a half thing didn't really play a big role to me until afterwards when I started doing my research and where I made my failures and why the failures I made were so tremendous. And I did the research on the Type 3 building, and any fire in a Type 3 building that's been going for quite a while is going to have fire in spots that you don't even realize exist. Mm-hmm. Because these buildings are so old, they've been renovated, they've been modernized, and it's just that they're a mess.
Well, what do you see when you get on the scene? Just visually set this fire scene up for me, as far as building, construction, smoke, fire, apparatus on the scene. Set this up for me.
So as we approached the scene, we were advised to lay out our 5-inch to another engine from a hydrant that was south of the incident. If you can imagine, Francis Brannigan referred to it as Anytown, USA. Downtown, you got the courthouse in the center and the buildings all the way around it. And you've got the road that runs between the buildings and the courthouse. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's what we were approaching, okay? And so we laid out our 5-inch, and we had a 100-foot aerial with a bucket on it, and we nosed in to the incident. So we approached it from the south, and we approached it from the east and turned south and pulled into the incident. The buildings were, like I said, type 3 construction. The fire building was 2 floors with a cockloft, and then the building attached to it was 3 stories.
Okay. Were you laying a supply line for your own apparatus or to someone else?
No, that was for somebody else.
So you laid a line and it was then connected to another apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What was that?
We just laid the hose out and told them to do whatever they need to do with it.
Okay. So your truck, as a truck, doesn't have a water supply to it at this point.
Correct.
Okay. Keep going.
So we turned south, and I kind of wanted to back into this incident because the apparatus and equipment and activity going on in front of the fire building wasn't really overly congested, but there was enough in there that placement of our apparatus was going to be difficult. Our apparatus was like I said, 100-foot. It was a rear mount, and we like to spot those with the turntable. And so by us coming in, driving in straight into the incident, it would have put our turntable on the B1 exposure.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to back in, but there was other supply lines being that were in our way, and we weren't going to drive over them. And so we just went ahead and nosed into the incident. I told the guys, go ahead and get the ladder truck set up. I went over to the command post, and that's when I did a face-to-face with one of our guys, and told him this is what's going on through radios. I'm going to talk with you. And he said, okay, I've talked with the chief. He wants you guys to get on the roof, cut a hole in the roof, and get the cockloft ventilated.
Okay, well, what are the smoke and fire conditions like at that point?
So when I got off the rig, I noticed there was a positive pressure fan in the front door on the street, blowing in the front door. Smoke was going from the west to the east. So it was going from the A side of the building to the C side of the building. Fire conditions you could tell they had a good working fire in there. But it wasn't fire blowing out the windows. The windows actually on the second floor were still intact. They had 1 3/4 inch, 2 3/4 going in the front door on the A side. And then I discovered later when I got on the roof to do my roof report, there was a 2.5 going in the back.
So how many crews are inside?
At this point, there was at least 4 or 5 crews.
So somewhere between 10 and 20 people inside?
Roughly. I really couldn't answer that to be
okay.
Completely honest. I mean,
okay.
I know there was 2 lines in the front, the 2.5 in the back. There, and I'm assuming since it was, an hour and a half since we had been dispatched, there was plenty of people inside trying to work this thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, did anything flag for you for that type of construction an hour and a half in? I think about fires in buildings that are built like that, and an hour and a half into it, and I know there are always some special exceptions, but I'm thinking an hour and a half into it, it's either out or it's beyond saving. So is this just a slow-moving fire or
Well, the thing for me when I heard the hour and a half thing was it's deep, and they're having trouble getting to it. Mm-hmm. Is kind of what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the Type 3 buildings, is because they get into places, they get into voids that we don't even realize exist.
Right.
And the next thing you know, this is a scenario that plays out. They get in there, they work forever, and it's just a deep-seated, hard-to-get-to fire.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am making these calls, or I'm making this illustration without having any experience on the inside with those guys.
Right.
I don't know what they were encountering.
Right.
I don't know how they were doing in their firefight. I don't know if they were making progress or if they were getting beat back. I don't know.
And you didn't have a radio on that channel to be able to listen to that.
Right.
Right. All right.
And so they had the fan that was blowing in the front door. The fire was not under control, and I remember telling the guy, shut the fan off. And he kind of questioned it a couple times, and I made the comment to him, I'm not going on top of this building if that fan is on, because the fire had not been placed under control.
Mm-hmm.
So they shut that fan down. By this time, our L truck's set up. This is where the next mistake was made. Our aerial truck being the rear mount, our turntable was placed on the B1 exposure. And so when we went to ladder the building, we were actually short of the fire building.
Okay.
And so I made the decision just to get an attic ladder because it was just going to be a short hop down to the fire building roof. But I wanted a little ladder up there because I didn't want to jump down and create, I do remember thinking I didn't want to create a significant impact load.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wanted a means of escape in the case something happened. It was relatively fast.
Mm-hmm.
I know that an attic ladder will not do that, especially if you got 3 or 4 guys up there. But obviously we had to make the fire building, and so that was the call that we made, was rather than shut the truck down, recradle it, pull up however many feet, and go through everything again. At that point I'm task orientated, just get it done. And so that's why I made the decision of just getting an attic ladder up there. And we grabbed our saws. We had a circular saw with a all-purpose blade, and then we had a chainsaw. And me and another guy made it up there. We got onto the B1 exposure, got down onto the fire building, and I told myself in my mind then, I better get on air. We had no smoke issues. It was clear as a bell up there, but my issue with it was if I fall through, I'm going to want this on. And that in itself, now I look at it as being that in itself should have been a red flag. Because if we're going to the roof with the even the possibility of thinking that you're going to go through, then the question has to be raised, why are we up there to begin with?
Mm-hmm. So why were you up there to begin with?
To cut a hole in the cockloft and get the cockloft ventilated.
Yeah, but
now
you're up there you're up there thinking that you might fall through.
Right, and the conditions on the roof were not bad. The structural integrity of the roof was good.
Mm-hmm.
There was no fire impingement from the underneath side, and I'm making that call based on the fact that there was no bubbling of the tar or anything like that. I mean, the roof was really in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember that going through my mind, in the event I fall through, I'm going to want to be breathing air.
Okay.
And so I went ahead and put my mask on, started breathing air, told my firefighter that was with me to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
And he agreed. He didn't argue about it and said, okay, and he put it on. And the first thing I did was made the Charlie side of the building to see what was going on back there. And that's when I noticed the 2.5 was going in that room or into the back of the building. There was smoke coming out of the first floor. There was a doorway that was opened up for the 2.5. There was smoke coming out of that door, and it was coming up the building. And then when it hit the roof line, the wind was pushing it back towards the east.
Okay.
So I turned around, found the roof. Like I said, the roof was in great condition. And at that point, I'm wanting to let's just get this thing opened up. I don't care where at this point. I just want to get it opened up.
Okay.
And so we started in cutting. Well, then our off-duty guy hit me up on the radio and had me come to the edge of the building on the A side so I could visually see him. And he told me when I got over there, can you reach over with your pipe pole and take out the windows of the second floor? And so I told him then, if we do this, it's over. The building's gone, because we had that prevailing wind coming from the west that would have been blowing right into the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a strong wind. It wasn't a stiff wind. It wasn't a wind. It would not have been a wind-driven fire. It just would have been enough air to do what we didn't want the fire to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so he acknowledged that they were aware of this, and they still wanted those windows opened up, so I obliged. I leaned over the edge of the building. I was on my stomach, and took out those windows with my pipe pole, and got up. And at that point, we had a couple other companies come up. And to be honest with you, Chief, I don't know where they came from. All I know is it seemed like a lot of things took place in a very short amount of time. We started cutting. I got hit up on the radio, went to the A side, had that brief discussion, 2-sentence discussion with this guy, leaned over, or actually laid down, took those windows out, stood back up, and then that's when I found our third firefighter and our driver operator was on the roof with us, and we had mutual aid companies up there with us now performing the cuts.
So how many total firefighters are on the roof now?
Well, there was 4 of us, and there was at least 2, because there was 2 that came back to me and said, we finished the cut, but our air is low. All you need to do is pull the decking. And there was 2 of them. So there's at least 6 up there now.
Okay.
So after they told us all that needed to be done was the decking needed to be pulled, and as these 2 guys told me this, they, obviously they said their air pack was running low. I was also having a conversation with another firefighter, and, barring the details, which are kind of irrelevant of the conversation that took place had me so frustrated and upset that I just took my pipe pole and started walking my way towards where the cuts had been made. No hole existed at this point. It was just cuts. And there was smoke coming through the cuts. And I remember, as I was walking towards this hole, all I remember is thinking about the conversation that had taken place and how frustrated and upset I was, and just simply was not paying attention to what I needed to be doing.
So that conversation, the frustration of that conversation, drew your attention off of the task that you were performing, and kind of drew your attention away from like being all in for safety, and what was on your mind was this little event that occurred that kind of was kind of occupying your mind space, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And so now I'm walking towards this hole, or these cuts. The smoke's coming through the cuts, and I do remember using my pipe pole to find my path, protect my path, or verify the stability of the roof as I was advancing towards this, just be on the safe side. But I really wasn't paying attention to the feedback of the pipe pole, if you would. I was thinking more about what had just taken place. And the only thing I can think, Chief, is I must have just missed the cuts with my pipe pole, and down I went.
What do you mean down I went?
Okay, so the the roof decking is cut. There's smoke coming out of the roof decking or coming out of these cuts. And so I stepped on the piece of the 4x4 hole, if you would. It may have been bigger. But I stepped on the decking. It got displaced by my body weight, and then that's when I fell.
So it flipped up and you went in the hole.
Right. And so, but I had forward progress. I had forward motion, and that forward motion carried me. Somehow the decking got displaced, and the forward motion carried me. So when I fell onto the rafters, onto the roof joists. And interesting enough, I called, I didn't call, I at the time, Francis Brannigan was actually still alive. And I was researching this information, and he had mentioned in his book that these Type 3 buildings, the roof joists and the floor joists typically will run parallel with the street. Mm-hmm. And I was walking perpendicular to those roof joists.
Mm-hmm. And
so when I fell on 1, 2, 3 roof joists. That's what actually was holding me up. And it was one moment I'm thinking about something, and then it seemed like an eternity had passed by. I remember I don't think I ever went unconscious, but it was enough that you kind of just had to sit there and think for a second to get the cobwebs blown out. You know, why am I laying down? I remember my thumb and my one of my fingers on my left hand. It just seemed like I wanted to close my hand in like a grip.
Mm-hmm.
And the end result was it was a torn bicep tendon. I strained my back also.
Were you in pain?
But not initially. Initially, it was more like, you know, did this just really happen? What just took place? Where am I? I mean, obviously knew where I was. I knew what I was doing. At this point, I was still trying to figure out how did I get from point A to point B?
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, we're talking milliseconds here. I mean, all this stuff goes through your brain so fast.
All right.
And so somewhere along the line, I realized I was laying on the roof joists, and so I decided to roll to my right side. My left side is what was injured, and I rolled to my right. I got reorientated. I remember seeing the clock on the courthouse, and I knew that was the front side of the building. That was the A side of the building, and that's where I needed to go. And so I got myself turned around. I started heading towards the A side of the building.
Where's the other firefighters? Did they know this happened to you?
Not at this point.
Okay.
And this time frame that we're talking here, it takes longer to describe it than what actually took place.
Sure, I understand.
The whole time frame probably took 30 seconds, if
Okay.
that. The distance from the A side to the hole was probably 25 feet, if that.
Mm-hmm.
So I fell. I realized what was going on. I got myself reorientated, and I remember crawling back towards the A side of the building. And that's when one of the firefighters that was standing there, I remember him hollering out my name, and he reached down and he picked me up.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked what was going on, and I said I fell in the hole. Well, by this time, our department policy or guideline at the time was any mutual aid runs that we go on, our battalion chief will go with us. And so by this time, our battalion chief was in the bucket of the building, mind you, that was laddered to the B1 exposure
Mm-hmm.
with an attic ladder onto the fire building. And so this guy helped me to my feet, and he said, "What happened?" I said, "I fell through the hole." And I walked over, climbed up the attic ladder, got in the bucket of the ladder truck, where my battalion chief was standing there coaching me in. And I remember turning around, and Chief, I swear those flames coming out of that hole had to have been 20 feet. I mean, it was amazing. And this is a 30-second time frame from the time I fell to the time I was in the bucket. It couldn't have been very long. It could not have been. It didn't seem like it was. But I remember turning and looking and seeing those flames coming out of that hole, and that's when the gravity of the situation, if you would, really came hard. And so that's when we started pulling guys off the roof. I guess we got the job done. We got the roof ventilated. So I went down and seeked out the medical guys and went to the hospital, had my x-rays done. My wife actually got the phone call from the assistant chief at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was interesting because at the time we still had a landline at home and we had a cordless phone. And I remember her telling me that she just happened to take the cordless phone to bed with her that night. And then she got that inevitable phone call, and I remember her telling me that, when the chief said, "Hey, this is Chief such and such," she told me she just sat straight up in bed. She was 8.5 months pregnant with my second child. I had a 2.5-year-old at the time. And so they came to the firehouse. By this time, only thing that was really injured was my bicep tendon was torn. My shoulder was in pain, but there was no definitive damage to it. Bumps and bruises here and there, and then my pride. And in fact, I think that's what the chief told my wife on the phone is, the only thing that's really hurt on him is his shoulder and his pride. So we went back to the firehouse. Wife came to the fire station, picked me up, and man, I tell you what, I never had a impression of my family like I did when I got in that car and saw her and my 2.5-year-old son. Nothing else. I don't think anybody who has not been in a close call or has been in these type of experiences can really appreciate what that feels like when you have that situation. Again, at the actual times that things were going on, I really wasn't thinking about the family. I wasn't thinking about line of duty deaths or type 3 buildings or hour and a half. I was just thinking about getting from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. Now, then, after it was all said and over, that's when things really started getting heavier, so to speak. The situation really started getting difficult, and so there's a lot of guys out there that have been in a lot worse situations than I was. And the thing that I looked at with this incident is I sat down and I just started being real honest with myself and asking myself those really serious questions. One of my favorite lines the guy gave me at the firehouse was, "Is the juice worth the squeeze?" And this building ended up being a total loss. And so here's a scenario where we got lucky. I mean, we dodged a bullet. We could have had a firefighter fatality on a total loss. Mm-hmm. And there's the question: is the juice worth the squeeze? And I get it. I know that we're here to save lives and protect property, and the guys out in Phoenix have done a wonderful job with their phrase, "We'll protect a lot to save a lot. We'll risk a lot to save a lot. We'll risk little to save little, and we'll risk nothing to save nothing." And I think that really kind of changed it was a paradigm shift for me. It changed the way I looked at delivering service to the incident. At the time I was 29 years old. I was pretty cocky. I had a lot of education. I had a lot of training. I had, for 29 years old, I felt like I had quite a bit of experience, and nothing really ever prepares you for something like that. And as horrible as this may sound, I'm so glad that this took place to me and not to one of the firefighters that were assigned to me at that given point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, I was, like I said, 29 years old, limited amount of experience, limited amount of training and education. I thought I was in good shape, ready to go. But I don't know at 29 years old with where I was in my career if I would have been prepared to mitigate a downed firefighter as fulfilling the role of an officer on the rig.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to mitigate that issue when you're a firefighter and the guy next to you runs into trouble. It's another thing to mitigate the issue when you're the officer of the rig and now one of your guys goes down that you're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
We all know it. We all say it. We all give it great lip service. But when it comes down to it, his life is greatly dependent upon what you tell him to do and what you tell him not to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do remember thinking, man, I am so glad that this happened to me and not to one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that. That's kind of how I felt when I was a new officer. That I would rather have something bad happen to me than somebody under my supervision.
And the interesting thing, we've kind of gone, I've progressed throughout the years and gotten more training, gotten more experience, gotten promoted to the lieutenant position, have exercised a lot of those different traits that we're taught. And, it's interesting because now, and this may be going a little bit off subject, but now, I'm 44 years old and getting ready to get a kid his license, and the way I want to deliver service today is totally different than the way I wanted to deliver service 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, you've matured.
And when I used to sit there and complain about the old guys in the firehouse and how sometimes they seem like they're apathetic and they're slow to the trucks. And now I find myself asking those older guys, hey, what should I be looking for? As I'm starting to get older, I'm noticing some things that are happening to my body that I didn't think would ever happen to my body. And I really impress on people, if you're in a younger age, understand this is coming and start preparing for it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It's the, maturing, but it's also the, those older guys, they were the way they were because they've,
mm-hmm.
If you want to say it, they've seen it, they've done it, and
mm-hmm.
they understand that is the juice worth the squeeze.
Yeah. I want to back up for a minute.
Okay.
For a minute. Because you had said when you got in the car with your pregnant wife and your, I think, 2-year-old or near 2-year-old, you said anybody who's not experienced a significant close call wouldn't know the feeling that I experienced at that point. I want you to describe that. Okay, you got into the car and just kind of unpackage that.
My son was 2.5 years old. He was sitting in his car seat, and he was visibly upset that we woke him up that early in the morning. He wasn't crying or anything, but he gave me a kind of a dirty look.
Yeah.
My wife and I talk about it now. We kind of chuckle about how he just looked like he was just so put out.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember coming out of the firehouse, and I remember turning to the left, walking towards the car. And, man, I tell you, my wife, I'd never seen her look so pretty. It's just really hard to describe the emotions because it makes you realize, I guess it makes you realize it doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's in that car is what matters. There's some departments in our area that did some studies, and McDonald's took an operational McDonald's up and running. They shut it down, tore down the building, and totally rebuilt it, and was back operational within 30 days. how many guys are we going to lose to these type of buildings?
Mm-hmm.
Because what? What are we wanting to achieve? And so when I got in the car, obviously I hugged my wife. She told me, she said, I didn't know what happened, but I knew something bad had happened. I didn't say anything to her. I just got in the car, looked at my son, and he gave me a dirty look back. And then I leaned over and hugged her. And like I said, she knew something significant had taken place. And at this point, I go back to the incident. Again, we're talking seconds. We're talking a very, very small period of time here that is now having, at the time in the car with the wife, man, that stuff is just coming down on you, and it's coming. You're starting to add all these things up and realizing just how different, just how significant this could have been if just one or two things had changed.
Mm-hmm.
Had I been walking a different direction and was walking parallel with the roof joist rather than perpendicular,
mm-hmm.
I would have fell between the two of them, and that would have been the end of it
mm-hmm.
for
mm-hmm.
a total loss. Go ahead.
When did you tell your wife what happened? I mean, look, the full story. Or have you?
No, I have. We talked on the way home that night.
Mm-hmm.
I told her the details.
Mm-hmm.
I told her about the conversation that me and this other guy had that had me so frustrated and upset. It just took my conscience away, I guess.
Your concentration. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just so frustrated. I could not believe that this had just taken place.
Mm-hmm.
We're on a working incident, and
mm-hmm.
this conversation just took place.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, and I believe in my heart that's why I had the problem that I had, is why I had the accident that I had, because I wasn't focused on the task at hand. And so I told her what happened, and she's pretty strong. She didn't cry or tear up or anything. She went to work the next day, no big, everything was fine. And but as more time had went on, the worse the situation looked. And we realize now, 20 years later, or not, maybe 15 years later now, what was the end result that we were wanting compared to what we got? Does that make any sense at all, Chief?
Yeah. Yeah, it sure does.
And so that's why I wrote Chief Goldfeder about a year after this took place, and that's when his close calls were starting to pick up some steam. He was starting to get more national attention towards it, and I didn't want to just call in and say, hey, I got upset on a roof and I almost fell through. I wanted to look at this incident, and most importantly, I wanted to be honest with myself.
Mm-hmm. Where
are the mistakes? And man, it's almost an endless list. I mean, the radio communications, the time frame that the building had been on fire, taking out the windows, having conversations on the fire or up on the roof that ultimately led to the incident. And so I really kind of, when I put this article together, I guess, and I wrote into Chief Goldfeder about it, I really wanted to make sure that people didn't make the same mistakes. Not that they will. I have all the confidence in the world that we've got a tremendous fire service out there in America, but we're still making some mistakes, and unfortunately a lot of these mistakes are not new mistakes. They're same mistakes that we make over and over again.
So give a few pieces of advice to a listener.
So the first thing is always consider the building type and the fire spread and the collapse hazard associated with every building you go on. I break it down, and I grill firefighters at our fire department about this. What are the 5 types of building construction, and what is the collapse hazard and the fire spread associated with each one? Because they're all different. You can't look at a residence fire and try to fight a Type 3 building the same way, or vice versa. It's like going and trying to fight ISIS the way they fought in Vietnam. It's not going to work. It's 2 totally different enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So understand that the biggest thing for me is to understand the building construction, fire spread, collapse hazard associated with it, and be able to deploy the appropriate tactics that fall within that category. That's the first piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece of advice is understanding fire behavior. And, we talked earlier about taking the windows out. We have positive pressure fan going into the building. Fire was not under control. We took windows out. Again, fire was not under control. Why did, 30 seconds after I was out of this hole, why did we have fire 20 feet out of the building? Well, UL and NIST have done a wonderful job explaining the science behind this stuff. I've actually been in contact with some guys over in Sweden and in Canada about what they're doing over there. And, man, I tell you, it's solid information. So understanding fire behavior and how it works. Mm-hmm. The firefighter 1 and 2 curriculum in America spends about 4 hours on fire behavior. We'll spend 40 hours talking about ropes and knots and rope systems and rope rescue, but we'll spend 4 hours on fire behavior. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I would understand fire behavior. And then the last thing, the biggest thing that I would want to portray to people is you got to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? It sounds funny, I get it, but in 3 days, what's this building going to look like? And try to predict that. And if you're looking at this building going, this thing's going to be on the ground by the time we leave, then I think you have some real serious questions you need to start asking yourself.
And that's what happened here. They tore this building down?
No, they actually, the contents, the restaurant, the apartments were all total loss. But the structure itself was renovated, and the new restaurant was put in, and apartments, I'm assuming, was put back in. But the building, I don't think, ever collapsed. It may have. I'll be honest with you, Chief, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what ended up happening. It doesn't matter at this point, and that's really kind of the whole point. Does it matter what really happened to the building? Mm-hmm. There was no lives at stake other than firefighter lives.
Yeah. Let me ask you just one thing, and then we're going to wrap it up here. You said, several times here, ask yourself if the juice is worth the squeeze. Say that in another way that a firefighter would say. If a firefighter said, I don't know if I understand what that cliche means. So what does that mean?
Is the risk worth the benefit? One of the things I try to, we talk, we can, how the fire service is, we can get into all different types of tactics and the way to do things. Well, one of the things I tell people, I'm not a big fan of a 2.5 in a residence. And the reason why is if you need a 2.5 in a residence, you got some other questions you need to be asking you.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of water for a very small area.
Right.
And so moving to 2.5 is not an easy task. It's labor intensive. Yes, it flows a lot of water. Yes, it can be done. I get it. But what's the end result? Is the risks that we're going to take encountering that much fire worth it? Is the benefit worth the risk? Mm-hmm. It's just risk benefits, risk management. Mm-hmm. We had a fire not too long ago where I was a lieutenant. I was on the ladder truck, and we put 2 guys on the roof. And the amount of effort that the guy had to use to get through the roof was almost nothing. He just had to set the axe on the decking to get the roof to open up. And I remember watching this operation, and how little effort it took and how easy it was for him. And the first thing I thought was, boy, that roof is really weak. A lot of mass is gone for it to take that easy. And so now I looked at it thinking, I put this guy up there for what? It just didn't make a lot of sense. And it causes you, or causes an officer, to start thinking a little bit more about the intangibles. We know the tangibles. We want to get the roof opened up, not getting into a whole big thing about fire behavior or anything, but typically we want to get the roof opened up. We want to get everything out of there, and the risk that those guys took for the reward that we got was not worth it. And I made a promise to myself then, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to put somebody in a position where I'm questioning if I should have done that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I wish more officers had that mindset.
Well, it's just, I think the dynamics of the fire service has to change. After 9/11, the chiefs went out and they did the 16 life safety initiatives for firefighters and trying to reduce firefighter fatalities by 50% in 10 years, 25% in 5 years, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And the question is have we done it? Have we changed? And Chief, the answer is no. We still have people holding on to practices that were acceptable in 1950, but they're not acceptable today. Mm-hmm. And that's, we could go off on this I could go off on this for quite a while. But this new modern, everybody will tell you the environment's changed. Everybody will tell you that the BTUs per second that we encounter in fires today are far, far more than what Grandpa had to deal with when he was fighting fire. Everybody accepts that, but they don't accept the changes that have to take place in tactics to address the changes in the fire environment. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's hard. I've been deploying some things at work at the firehouse that there's people who have been very upset. Period. It's going against the fire service. You don't fight fire from the outside, or you don't hold the door shut. Things of that nature. Well, we all will agree things have changed, but we're not willing to change our tactics, and it's hard. And so if there's guys out there that are running into these same experiences where they're trying to change the different tactics that are associated with the new modern fire behavior stuff, listen, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell, but stick with it, see it through. The science is sound. The fire dynamics don't change. Mm-hmm. And I think we're kind of getting off base here, but you said what do I want the firefighters to get out of this? Mm-hmm. Building construction, fire spread, and collapse hazards associated with each one, because they're all different. And understand that. Be able to talk intelligently about it. Be able to talk about how your tactics are going to be based on this given situation, not based off an SOG, based off of, well, that's what they did over in wherever. No, we're going to base our tactics based off of this given situation, and we're going to take the predictable stuff, the fire behavior, the building construction, the collapses, and the fire spread, and we're going to use that stuff to our advantage. That's the biggest one. And then understanding this modern fire behavior stuff is incredibly important. It's got to change. We've got to change. We don't have a choice.
Yep. Great takeaways.
I don't understand it, to be honest with you. Yeah. I was talking with the guy in Sweden, and you can edit all this out, Chief, if you want to, but I was talking with the guy in Sweden. He told us in 30 years they've killed 2 firefighters. in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know there's some dynamic differences between the U.S. and Sweden. A small country versus a big country. I mean, I don't know how many million of firefighters we have in America, how many fires we have in America compared to over there. But 30 years is a big span. I mean, that's a career.
Mm-hmm.
And they've killed 2 in 30 years. That's because they changed the practices. They understand this thing and how it works, and they're taking fire dynamics and using the fire dynamics against itself, which is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a cancer problem. They don't have a stroke problem. They don't have a heart attack. Why would we not listen to this?
Well, we kind of get stubborn in our mindsets and think that we've got it figured out. We've got the best way of doing everything. And there's a lot of people that think that, worldwide we've got the lock on everything. And as I get the chance to travel the world and I've worked on fire dynamic studies with the folks from Sweden and the folks from Canada, and we're probably talking actually about the same people. I'm just continually fascinated at how advanced their thinking is and how they're looking at incidents from the perspective of risk management and risk and reward, and it leads to different tactics. They don't seem to be. Now, I haven't seen them fight fire firsthand, but they don't seem to be all gripped up with the bravado and machoism of thinking that the fire is an enemy that we have to kill and we have to beat, and if the fire beats us, then we lose, and we're not worthy. And they don't have that mindset from the folks that I've talked to. Fire, going to a fire is just a job. And if the job means we can get it out, then we get it out. And if the job means we can't get it out, well, then this one goes to the ground, and we'll hope the circumstances are better for the next one. They don't take it personal.
It's funny you say that, because number one, and you're probably the same way, I have never been to a fire that we didn't get out.
Eventually, they all go out. They're anything.
They all go
look
out.
around. You don't see them burning.
And it's funny you say that, because you were talking about how there's a machoism of the American Fire Service and how we want to get in there and fight the beast. And I went to lunch with some of these guys during FDIC, and one of the guys made the comment to me. He goes, "Why is America kind of apprehensive to this stuff?" And I said, "Well, I don't know why we're apprehensive. I don't know why we're slow to respond, or what it appears to be slow to respond. And I know some of your listeners may not appreciate that, but we're resistant to change for some reason. But we're so caught up in setting up the incident. We pull up, we got smoke showing out of the first floor window, and we're initiating the incident management system. We're securing water sources. We're getting our sectors set up, securing utilities, all this stuff. These guys over there, they're just going and putting the fire out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guy asked me, he goes, so what's it going to take to get the American Fire Service to buy into this, to understand this stuff? And I said, well, and this is all in joking, but I think it illustrates a point. It's real easy. Quit teaching the firefighters this stuff and start teaching the moms and the dads and the wives and the husbands and the kids. That way, when the guy comes home, talks about how this guy, I was inside and the ceiling collapsed on us, and then they can start asking the question, why? Why were you in there?
Right.
It doesn't make sense to me. Why are you telling me this when there's easier ways, there's better ways out there?
Yep. Hey,
I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're going to go and teach the families this stuff. I'm not saying, but it illustrates my point.
Yeah, well, that it'd be interesting to see what they're doing with the families in these other countries that are only having 2 fatalities. I mean, I got to think that they're training differently than the way we're training. And I think part of it has to do with teaching firefighters how to be critical thinkers and resilient problem solvers. And we we tend to teach firefighters hands-on to throw just one solution to a fire, and that's take a hose line through the door and kick its butt and take its name. And there are other options.
It frustrates me, the whole nozzle selection issue. Why is automatic nozzles a bad thing? It's because we've deployed them inappropriately. We've used them inappropriately. And so now they have a bad name.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we could have studied this stuff a little bit deeper and understand the difference between surface cooling, atmospheric cooling, atmospheric inerting, and when to deploy these different types of techniques. Everybody talks about the toolbox, right, and having as many tools in your toolbox. Well, you got to understand how to use the tools, and I think that's where our failure is.
Mm-hmm.
We try, as you said, throw one solution to a multitude of problems.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's a conversation we can have on another day. We are out of time. We've been at it this a little over an hour. It's amazing how time passes by so quickly when you're enjoying the conversation and sharing and learning. Todd, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your close call survivor story of falling through the roof vent hole and then just having it not soon after just erupt into flames, and just how close that was, and for sharing those takeaway lessons. They're powerful. Thank you for so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, and thanks to your listeners. I hope they get something out of it.
I'm sure they will. Thanks, buddy. Thank you, Lieutenant Todd Budd, for sharing your incredible close call survival story. Before I close out today's episode, I want to take a moment to thank the departments and organizations that have hosted recent Situational Awareness Matters tour stops. Your efforts to bring this valuable and powerful training on situational awareness and high-risk, high-consequence decision-making to your members and others in your region are greatly appreciated. Recently, stops included the Ohio Fire Chiefs Association Conference in Columbus, Ohio, the Norristown Fire Department in Pennsylvania, the NSA Conference in Washington, D.C., the West Point Military Academy in West Point, New York, the Aberdeen Proving Ground Military Facility in Aberdeen, Maryland. And if you're interested in attending an upcoming tour event, August 3rd to 7th, I'll be in Gary, Indiana, delivering a Company Officer Development Institute week-long program. August 8th, a situational awareness program for the Wadesville, Indiana Fire Department. August 10 to 14, another Company Officer Development Institute week-long program in Crawfordsville, Indiana. August 17th to 21, I'll be doing a ride-along with the United States Forest Service and McCall Smoke Jumpers in McCall, Idaho. If you're near that area and you want to get hooked up, reach out to me. August 26th to 28th, I'll be at Fire Rescue International in Atlanta, Georgia, delivering 4 programs at FRI International. If you're interested in attending a upcoming Situational Awareness Matters tour stop, head over to the SA Matters website and click on the blue box on the right side of the homepage that's labeled Upcoming Events Schedule. And here's hoping there's a tour stop near you and we'll get a chance to meet up and chat. If you're not a member of the SA Matters community of learners, please consider joining. There are more than 5,000 members connected here on SA Matters, sharing ideas about how to improve situational awareness and how to make better decisions under stress, and how to train members to be critical thinkers and resilient problem solvers. Membership is free, and when you sign up, you get a special report that I've created for new members called 25 Best Practices for Improving First Responders Safety. If you're not a member yet, head over to the samatters.com website and click on the red box on the right side of the homepage that says Free Membership. As a reminder, every episode of the SA Matters radio show has a corresponding show notes page on the samatters.com website. All the most recent episodes scroll on the homepage, but for older episodes, you can go to samatters.com / and enter the episode number, which I always mention at the start of the show. So, for example, if you wanted to access the show notes for episode 50, you'd open up your internet browser, type www.samatters.com / 50, and that would take you to the page that contains the link to that episode. The show notes page may also contain additional information and resources about the episode, and depending on who the guest is, it might also include scene pictures, video, and audio. and the contact information for the guest if you want to follow up with them. On the show notes page, you can also ask questions and leave feedback on the episode. If you want to get connected with me on social media, you can follow @RichGasaway or @SAMatters on Twitter. The SA Matters Twitter community is more than 15,000 followers strong, and thanks to all who is following and engaging with me on Twitter. I really appreciate your support there. You can also get connected on Facebook by liking the SA Matters page, and on LinkedIn, you can find me by searching Rich Gasaway on LinkedIn. And thanks to everyone who's connected with me on Facebook and LinkedIn. I certainly enjoy the conversations that we have there as well. Well, that's it. Episode 67 is complete. Thank you to our guest, Todd Budd. Thank you to our sponsor, Midwest Fire. And thank you, our listeners, for sharing some of your valuable time with me today. I sincerely appreciate your support of the SA Matters mission. If you've experienced or witnessed a near miss or a close call and would like to have a platform to share your lessons learned with others, please contact me by visiting the SAMatters.com website and clicking on the Contact Us link on the top of the homepage. Have you ever thought about this, that your lessons learned from a close call could save someone else's life? Think about that for a moment. If you want to share your experience, contact me. If you like the show, please consider going over to iTunes or Stitcher Radio and subscribing. Search for SA Matters Radio. SA Matters Radio. Please consider leaving me some feedback there as well. And if you like the show, I'd appreciate a 5-star review. Not only will that motivate me to work harder for you, but it will also help others to find the show. Be safe out there, and may the peace of the Lord and strong situational awareness be with you always.
You've been listening to the Situational Awareness Matters radio show with Dr. Richard B. Gasaway. If you are interested in learning more about situational awareness, human factors, and decision-making under stress, visit SAMatters.com. If you are interested in booking Dr. Gasaway for an upcoming event, visit his personal website at richgasaway.com.